Hi folks, Nick from Creation Army TV. Thanks again for watching, and as always I ask you to please subscribe and check back regularly because I'm always posting new videos. Now if you watched my last video on clipping masks, you'll be up to speed. Clipping mask in my last video was a great way to contain artwork, either multiple pieces or just one piece of artwork inside of a shape. And it's good and it's quick and it has its place in Illustrator, but sometimes you'll find yourself doing more complex pieces where you need your artwork to fade away in opacity, or maybe you need your artwork to be masked by a much more complex shape than clipping mask. And so that's where clipping mask ends, that's where it's limited, and that's where we can start using opacity masks to achieve this complex fading look. So what is a mask? Now if you've used Photoshop before, you've probably seen masks before, you're probably familiar with the concept. But a mask is a way to hide or reveal artwork using grayscale. I have a pure white star here, just like in my last video about clipping masks. I used that star to clip the artwork beneath it. And I was limited by how I could shape the star. I was limited by basically the shape of the star. I was limited as to how I could manipulate the star in terms of appearance. I couldn't use raster effects. So that was a shape concept. But when you're talking about opacity masking, what we're going to do is use the grayscale value of this star to hide or reveal artwork underneath. And I just mentioned Photoshop. There's masking in Photoshop all the time. Maybe you'll make an adjustment layer and you'll notice a white square next to it. That is the mask. Or sometimes you'll just make a mask on a layer because you want to hide a certain area without erasing it. You can do the same thing here. So let's talk about the grayscale concept. Here is the concept for masking in this program, in Photoshop, and in After Effects. Basically, you've got your mask and your artwork, and your mask can only be shades of gray. It can only be pure white, shades of gray, or pure black. That's all that will register with the program when you're making a mask. It doesn't matter if you make it blue, the software will still draw on the grayscale value of the blue that you're using, or the red, or any color. So it's best just to stick to grayscale. So artwork that is contained inside of an opacity mask that is pure white will be completely visible. It's almost like the analogy that I like to draw is like walking into a room. If the lights are on in a room and there's lots of white light in the room, then you'll be able to see things in the room. But if the lights are off, if you walk into a small room and there's no lights on, then you're not going to be able to see anything. Everything in the room will be invisible to your eye because there's no light. But if there's a faint light on, like if there's a candle on in the corner, then you'll be able to somewhat see the contents of the room. The same thing goes for masking in this program and in Photoshop. So again, you make your mask white or gray, and your artwork will be visible, and it will get more and more transparent as the mask gets darker. Here's what I mean by that. Let's look at these orange circles with stars. I'll move this out of the way. Here we have identical artwork all the way across left to right, but each one of these stars gets grayer and grayer, darker gray as we go left to right. So if I take these two items and I want to make an opacity mask, just like I did clipping mask in the last video, I'll just, instead of doing a clipping mask, I'm going to come up to my transparency palette and hit make mask. So if I hit this button right here, now notice on the palette we have our original thumbnail of our original artwork, little chain link, and then the actual grayscale value of the mask. And here is what the artwork looks like once it's been masked. So remember, our mask was a white star. So this white area reveals the orange artwork underneath. Now the rest of the orange circle is still there, but since there's no object here in the mask, then basically that orange circle is clipped away. And the result, I'm sorry, I'm going to release this. The result of this white star is a perfectly visible and perfectly opaque star. Notice we cannot see through the star at all, except in the areas where the star isn't, right? We can see through it there. But if you make an opacity mask that is more gray, like this one, 20% gray, mask these together, now you're going to end up with a star that is actually 80% transparent. So I can see through, you can start to see through the star here. Start to see through the orange circle to the black bar underneath, and so on down the line. So as these masks get darker or further towards pure black, then that circle, even though its opacity is listed here at 100%, its mask is hiding it down to 20% opacity, and you can actually see through it to the items below. Alright, so that's a great way of doing things. You can also do partial masking. You don't always have to hide your entire object. Let me go release this and show you how I can pull this off. Let's say I want this arrow to fade off in opacity near its tail, but I want the arrow head to be perfectly visible. You can only achieve this with opacity masking. Can't do it with clipping mask, and you certainly can't drag a gradient into the art brush palette like I did here. So I made my arrow, and I want it to become invisible near its tail. So one good way of doing that is to go ahead and just make a rectangle, just like that. And of course, if I made this a mask right now, I would make a big invisible chunk in my arrow, and I don't want that. I want it to gradate, so I want it to go basically from black to white. I have here in my graphic styles palette a basic black to white gradient. I encourage you to go ahead and make that and store it. This comes in, I have this in every work template that I make because I use it all the time, especially for opacity masking. So if I made this my opacity mask right now, here's what would happen. The arrow is, the gradient is backwards, it's cut off here, I have no arrowhead. So this is all wrong, this needs adjustment. And here's how we're gonna do this. First, you're gonna notice that by default, this checkbox that says clip is checked. That means that artwork that falls outside the perimeter of the mask itself is hidden or clipped. I'm going to uncheck that. Now all that artwork comes back. You can still see it, and in fact you can still edit it. And now notice how the mask is now backwards. I want the tail end of this to fade off. So to edit the mask at any time, you want to actually come up to your transparency palette and click on this. So you can click on the mask and notice how it's got an orange box around it here where my mouse is. That means that we're editing the mask right now. And if I go and I try to touch anything else on the artboard, I won't be able to. I'm in a special isolation mode right now where I'm only editing the mask artwork, which is this gradated rectangle. Another quick tip, if you want to actually see this gradated rectangle, right now it's invisible, you can hold Alt or Option on your keyboard and click on the mask, and everything will be hidden and you will be shown what your mask actually looks like in isolation. So let's Alt click on the mask again to hide that view. So now we're back to our mask editing view. I'm going to rotate this rectangle around so that the black end of it is over on the left, and I'll just bring the black end near the end of the arrow. But notice how we can still see the arrow. It hasn't faded off completely into invisibility. Alright, I've got my mask in the correct place, the head looks fine, alright, but I want this to fade off. For sure I want it to fade off. So I'm just going to edit the gradient on this rectangle. To do that, just hit G or come to your gradient tool here on the toolbar And then the gradient annotator should pop up. This is a tiny diagram that should show you what your gradient is doing. It starts here on this end as black and it ends over here as pure white. So I'm just gonna drag, I'm just gonna, put my mouse far away from there so that I can drag here and create a new gradient annotation. And I want to start black here and go over to the right side and have that be pure white. And of course that's incorrect. That's because my gradient is backwards. So if you come up to your gradient palette and hit this little reverse gradient button, then it will switch from black to white. So now we've, in a few steps, we've accomplished something that you can't accomplish any other way in Illustrator, and that is a fade off of artwork. And when you're done, always make sure to re-click on the artwork thumbnail here in the transparency palette to go back to editing your artwork. Now I can take this arrow and maybe color it orange or something like that, and I have something that has a professional look where you're illustrating movement of something and you're fading off the arrow. Adds that nice little touch to your artwork. And just to show you what that looks like when there's artwork underneath, I'll make this star, I'll push it to the bottom, and I'll place it over here. So now you can see, let's say I made that pink or something. Now you can see that the arrow is fading off in opacity as it goes down the line until finally it's 100% opaque up here near the head of the arrow. So this is a great way to use Opacity Mask. Alright, here's another way to use Opacity Mask. You don't have to use Opacity Mask just on one object like I just did. You can actually apply it to groups of objects. Now these clouds are all identical and they're ungrouped. You don't have to group things together, but you can have multiple objects that are masked. So here's something that I have to do all the time. I have to make these illustrations or set up these scenes where we can see the sky, and to add a little bit of style or realism to these clouds, my client or I might want to make the ones that are far away fade off in opacity, the smaller ones near the horizon. So to do that, I'm just going to make a rectangle, probably this wide, okay, for now, because we can adjust it later. And what I want to do is mask these items with a gradient. I want the clouds near the top to be fully visible and non-transparent, and I want the clouds near the horizon to be to fade off in opacity and be less and less visible. So I'll make a gradient rectangle, and of course I will go from up to down like that, again with the gradient tool, G. And if we look at this rectangle, remember with the concept of grayscale masking that items that are masked by pure white will be visible, and items that are masked by darker and darker shades of gray become less and less visible. So this will be my mask. I'll actually make it the size of my items because I want it to encompass them. So I'll use the layers palette to choose my rectangle, which is my mask, and then all the clouds. And what I'm doing, by the way, here's another quick tip: to grab things, to select things using the layers palette, hold the Alt or Option key and click on them, and you'll actually select them on the artboard. So it's a great way to select things that are not visible or within groups. So I'll select my rectangle, and I'm going to hold Shift as well as Option, and I'll click on each one of the clouds. Again, I'm holding Option and Shift, and I'm individually clicking on objects. So I have everything selected, including this mask, and I'll hit Make Mask. Notice how I didn't have to group anything at all. As soon as I hit Make Mask, it automatically, Illustrator automatically made me this group, which is underlined. This underline means that you have an opacity mask active on this group. And notice how that rectangle the grayscale rectangle that I made a minute ago is now not listed here in the rundown in the layers palette. It only exists here on the transparency palette. And so notice, let's take a look at our clouds. let's see what we got here. We've got some clouds that, as they get farther down near the horizon, actually fade off in opacity. And I can change the color of my sky. You know, here's a nice orange sky or something like that. And these clouds are fading off nicely toward the horizon. And at any time, once again, if I want to edit my mask, I can select the entire group, or I can do that by holding Option and clicking on this group, and then this thumbnail of the mask will light up in the transparency palette. I click on it, and now I can edit it to my heart's content. So if I hit the gradient annotator and move it maybe a little farther down, now my clouds become a little bit more visible. I can move the entire gradient this way. Maybe I want my clouds to be less visible as they go to the right. You can do whatever you want with this mask, and your artwork will sort of obey the grayscale level of that mask. So one last thing that I want to mention in this video, we're back to looking at this model. If you watched my last video, I used a clipping mask to isolate one area of the photo, just like this, and I drew a circle around her, and I selected both the objects. I used clipping mask, and I isolated one area of the photo with a perfect circle. Again, that's great if you just want to do one shape, but what if I wanted the perimeter of that circle to be fuzzy? What if I wanted it to fade off in opacity? What if I wanted to add more circles? I can't do that with a clipping mask. I can only do it with opacity mask, and here's how. Once again, I will make a circle however I want it to be. Maybe it's around her face. Maybe it's an oval. I'll make it larger, just like that. And I'll take these two objects, the circle and the photograph, and I'll mask them. And you're about to see me make a mistake. I'll hit mask and you'll see what's happening here. What is going on here? There's nothing visible. The reason is I forgot to switch my fill and stroke on my circle, and it's pure black stroke. So this circle, if I alt click on the thumbnail, this circle is a pure black circle with a stroke. I can make it nice and thick, and you can see. And so this area is basically hiding the photograph, and because clip is checked, nothing is visible on the photograph. So that's a mistake to look out for. So you might run into this when you're doing your first opacity masks, and that's okay. You can still fix it. So what you want to do is click on the mask here in the transparency palette, select the circle, and change the stroke color to white. Now look what's happening. Now only this area of the photo where the mask is white is exposed. So that's wrong now too. I'm on the right track. I'm almost there. What I want to do is switch my fill and stroke so that I have a solid filled mask, which will show the photo. To do that, just hit Shift X or this little arrow right here. I'll hit Shift X. There we go. Now my model is visible, and look at our mask thumbnail. Now that looks correct. So I mentioned a minute ago, what if I want my mask to be fuzzy or fade off, you know, as if it's feathered? That's easy to do. Make sure that you're editing your mask, select the mask. Also notice in your layers palette that there's just this one item that is isolated. That is this oval here in the transparency palette. And then all you have to do is select it and hit Effect, Blur, Gaussian Blur. So let's maybe blur it like 5 pixels and hit Preview. Okay, so here's what's happening. The photo, or the photo is unaffected underneath. You start to see a feathering or a fading off. What's happening is the mask itself is fuzzy, and it's fuzzing off, or it's feathering off into this state of transparency. And so the effect that that has on the photo underneath is that it's feathered. So if I draw a star, like, you know, again, I keep going back to this star, But if I put this star underneath, you see what's happening. You can see that the photo is now partially feathered, partially covering that star with opacity. And that's fine. You might want to accomplish that look. Notice that I have this sharp edge at the top. That's actually the very top of the photograph. To fix your mask, I've already showed you to click on this and move the mask around. But what if you want to change the photograph? If I change the photograph right now, you'll notice that the mask shrinks with it. The mask and the photograph just did the same thing. The reason for that is this chain link in between them, which I pointed out a few minutes ago. I'll undo one time. What if I want to shrink and move my photograph, but I want my mask to stay in the same place? All you have to do is uncheck the chain link, and now they move independently. So I can move my photograph down and away, and the mask stays in the same place. In other words, my mask is still right here, and my photograph has moved to a different area. So that might be a look that you're going for, or you might have multiple items within a mask. You might just want to move one without moving the mask itself. So that covers that. One last thing that I want to talk about, and this is a great thing that I mentioned in my video on clipping masks. You can only make a clipping mask with one shape, but in an opacity mask, you are not limited. You can make as many shapes as you want to. So I'm editing the mask now. So let's add a square and make it white. So now this is exposing, this white area is now exposing this area of the photograph. I can also add a star if I want to, and that's perfectly white. Or I can make it a slight shade of gray, and it will hide a bit of the photo right here. Notice I still have that sharp edge. That's because this star exists in front of or above the feathered oval that I made before, which is this one. So if you drag this below the oval, then you'll get nice feathering and a sharp star. So it's important to keep in mind your layer order of the items that are in your mask. Again, I have this oval, this rectangle, and this star right here. Maybe I want to draw the arrow that I was using before. Maybe I'll make it pure white. So you're not limited, in other words, to what kind or how much artwork you can put in your layer, your opacity masking. Opacity masking is great for all kinds of applications, especially when you want something to fade off and maybe become visible in another area. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned a lot about opacity masking. It's one of those non-obvious but very powerful functions in Illustrator. Please subscribe to my channel. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Nick with Creation Army, and I'll have lots more great videos coming in the near future. Take care.